Hello, and thank you for joining us here on the Neutral Zone. I am Phil Milani, joined as always by my trusty sidekick, my partner in crime. Really, the best way to describe this person is my everything. It's at Eric Dalala.
Phil, great to be with you. 1 week until the NFL draft. I'm excited.
Yeah, heard from General Manager George Paton today. We're going to break down everything that he had to say in his pre-draft press conference. Eric, before we dive into that, how'd you like that intro?
That was great. I love the enthusiasm. I love the intensity. I loved the content. I think that's the biggest thing.
Eric, for a while there, I thought people were 50-50 on the intro. But after bringing it back last week, there was overwhelming support. Mark Horney, nice to hear the original intro again. Lisa Lane, what a relief to hear the original intro. Bronco Batman, great show as always. Michael Peck, Eric and Phil, you guys are awesome. You know, the list just goes on and on and on. They're pumped up about the intro being back.
Hey, why wouldn't they be? It's a great intro to start a great show, chock full of information.
Yeah, a lot of information. The only one negative comment I really see here is from Feely. He says, still can't believe the Broncos or whoever chose these two for a media podcast.
Well, that's what happens when you win the Broncos contest that they hold, and it's a lifetime contract. I mean, pretty much nothing they can do at this point. We're here to stay, Feely.
Yeah, exactly. We got one comment here from Martin Sobziak, maybe. Sorry if I butchered that last name there. But he says, Eric was born 1 day before me. My birthday is tomorrow. Of course, he's referring to last week when, Eric, the podcast came out on your birthday.
That's right. And I turned, what do we say, 16 years old, I think?
I think it was
16. Wow. Tom Brady's NFL career is older than I am. That's kind of wild.
Yes, Tom Brady, his career can buy a beer legally.
Yeah.
So, Eric, let me tell people what we're going to be talking about on today's show. I'm not sure if you could guess this, but the quarterback position is going to be a big topic of conversation.
I think it makes a lot of sense, Phil. I think I read there were 22 questions to George Paton on Thursday. I believe 9 of them were related to the quarterback position, which it's not quite 2019 in season when Vic Fangio did a post-bye press conference, and I think 18 of 20 questions were about Drew Lock. So we're not quite to that level yet, but we're close. We're on our way.
Yes. I think that's because George Paton said, we're going to address this position. We want more competition there. I think he said that when he was introduced.
Yeah.
And they haven't done that yet. So people eager to know what's happening at the quarterback position. And with 1 week to go before the draft, tried to see if we could gain any insight there on Peyton's thoughts.
Did you get any?
No. Well, we'll dissect what he had to talk about. We'll also talk about maybe whether or not it makes sense for the Broncos to trade up or to trade back. We'll talk about that a little bit. And then also the offensive line. What's going on with the offensive line? Because there's 2 tackles who are at the top of this draft that could be instant upgrades maybe for the offensive line, if you want to say that. So we'll talk about whether or not it makes sense to take one of those guys.
Those talked a lot about quarterback and defense. Those tackles, I think, have gained a little steam for the Broncos lately in some mock drafts, which George Paton says he reads the mock draft. So if you're out there thinking what we're doing is not important, he's listening to us. Hopefully he doesn't do what we say, because that would obviously be very bad. But
Eric, I heard that he read our mock drafts, like our simulator, and he really liked mine. I don't know. That's just what I hear. Okay.
Yeah, I talked to him about that. He said he was glad he gets to take next year off because he traded away all his picks for 2022.
Eric, am I forgetting anything else that we have for this episode? I'm not sure. Am I?
I think we've got a little bit of an interview with a Hoff.
With the Hoff, Eric. Steve Atwater. The fans said, we want to hear from Steve. Can we get Steve on the podcast? Well, guess what? We got him, baby.
Yeah. I mean, we used the entire Neutral Zone budget to get Steve to come on the podcast, but it's worth it, I think.
Yeah, that's why you and I are recording in 2 new locations today, because we had to sell our properties.
Yeah, is the electricity even working where you are right now? Kind of in the dark over there.
Yeah, it's off.
Wow.
We can't afford anything now, but we did get the Hoff, Mr. Steve Atwater. He got his gold jacket this week to fit. He doesn't get to keep it right now, but just to make sure that it fits for the big night. Talk to him about that. Talk to him about what he knows about the plans for what's about to happen in Canton. And then, of course, we got his thoughts on the draft. No surprise here, Eric. He thinks the Broncos should take some defensive players.
Yeah, surprise there. It just shows you how long it's been since Steve was elected to the Hall of Fame. And I think we've had 3 or 4 podcasts where we ask Steve what's going on with the Hall of Fame. I mean, that's just how long it's been.
Yeah. Hopeful that everything can take place as scheduled here, as more and more people get the vaccine, Steve Atwater included. So,
yeah,
a jam-packed episode here of the Neutral Zone. Eric, say a fan wants to let us know who we should interview next. They say, hey, we want Steve Atwater. We get Steve Atwater. But if a fan were to say, hey, I want you to interview this guy, I want you to interview this person, how can they do that?
Yeah, well, they could leave an email at neutralzoneshow@gmail.com. They could call in and leave a voicemail at 707-NEUTRAL. We'll play that right on the show. Got an email we're going to read a little bit later, Phil. And then you could reach out on Twitter at Broncos Podcast to get in touch with the official podcast account, or at Phil Milani, at Eric Dalala. It's Eric with an A, Phil with a PH. Would you say it's traditional spelling, Phil?
I would say non-traditional.
Yeah. I think that's it. You could write. I can give them your home address if you want them to send you a letter or something.
Maybe at the end of the episode.
Okay. If you make it all the way through, I'll give you Phil's home address.
Yeah. Thank you, Eric. Let's dive right into our first topic of conversation, talking about the quarterback position. Eric, George Paton on Thursday today said that he felt like Drew Lock was trending in the right direction. He said that he likes Drew Lock, but he also said that he wouldn't rule out whether or not they might take a quarterback here. He said that you have to have a really good quarterback in the NFL to have success. And he said that's a reason why there might be 5 quarterbacks taken in the top 10, according to Paton. That's what he said. What'd you read? Can you read anything in between the lines there? What were your takeaways?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to take away from this, just because you can go in so many different directions. I mean, he talked about how he liked having Drew around, how he thinks Drew is going in the right direction. We've heard him say again and again this offseason that Drew has all the skill. He's got the talent that he needs. And so you could take all that. And then I asked him, Phil, what's the challenge in evaluating college quarterbacks? And he said it's all a projection. Whereas in the pros, you can say, oh, this is how we know what Drew Lock did against the Raiders. We know what he did against the Chiefs. We know how he's going to respond in high pressure situations. You don't know any of that for a college quarterback. So Drew is the known entity. And I think from Peyton's comments, you could take them and say, oh, well, they've seen enough from Drew that, maybe they want to add competition, but maybe you can't rule out him being the starter, even if George Paton wasn't ready to declare him that today on this Thursday. But on the other hand, you could listen to how he talks about Justin Fields and Trey Lance as game changers, as dynamic athletes, as guys with extremely high upside, and think, oh, they must really like one of those players. And we'll get to this, Phil, but then he talks about, hey, if there's a guy worth going up and trading for, we're going to do that. And you think, oh, well, maybe I can convince myself that they're going to go get those guys. And then you can convince yourself too, well, maybe there's a reason to see if one of them falls to 9. And there's just so much there that I think it does create kind of this smoke screen that George Paton wants. But overall, Phil, this is my big takeaway. If the Broncos had added a quarterback in free agency, not via trade like a Matt Stafford, but if they had added who are some of the guys that signed a Nick Foles, a Mitchell Trubisky, one of those type of guys, I think Drew Lock would be sitting here right now and think, man, I've got a really good chance to beat these guys out and be the starter. The fact that you're now going into this draft and the Broncos have a top 10 pick and they've done all this work, it's going to be, they're still going to let Drew compete, of course. But if you draft a Trey Lance or a Justin Fields, you're going to do that with the intention of them being the guy long term. And so it's just interesting how, even though the Broncos haven't made a move yet, I think the lack of a move almost puts more pressure on Drew Lock because of what could happen next week.
It's really hard to speculate here, in my opinion. I mean, to me, this is the most interesting press conference of the entire year, just because think about it from George Paton's perspective. They've worked for so long, spent so many hours. The scouts have worked all year around to get ready for this moment. And then now he's up in front of cameras trying to answer questions about these, guarded secrets, essentially, is what, So I don't think that you're going to gain too much insight other than this is what was my interesting takeaway was this was really the first time we heard him say, you've got to have a quarterback to win in this league. And that is still a question mark for this team right now. I think that he's not going to come out and say anything too definitive on Drew Lock. I think that it makes sense for him to say positive things about Drew Lock right now, but it's not like he's going to come out and say anything negative at this point. So I think that you just got to sort of understand where Peyton is coming from when he meets the media here and just know that, look, we're not going to gain too much insight here other than really him saying, look, we've got to have good play if we want to win in the NFL at the quarterback position.
Yeah, and as of today, Phil, I think the odds are still, of course, that Drew is going to be the guy on day one, just because there's nobody else on the roster that, and we'll talk about this in a second, but Brett Rippon and Jeff Driscoll are not going to push him for that starting job. And I think even if they trade for somebody, maybe it makes for a good camp competition. But say you trade somebody and you don't draft a first-round quarterback, I still think Drew is probably the guy. Now, if he turns the ball over a lot early in the season, maybe that changes. But I think week one, he's still the guy. Again, the only place where I think it gets difficult for him is if you draft a first-round quarterback here. It just changes the entire dynamic. We've mentioned, Phil, that if you draft a guy like a Trey Lance or a Justin Fields, is Drew even on the roster in August or September? Do you sign a backup or trade for a backup and then move Drew as well? I mean, there's just so much uncertainty, and I know everyone's excited about the prospect of, or not everyone, but a lot of people are excited about the prospect of a new quarterback. It's intriguing to me, certainly. There is always going to be the what if you don't go back to Drew for at least a little bit more time, because in some ways he did get the short end of the stick last year. He's clearly very, very talented. I think he can be more consistent. The biggest question to me, Phil, though, is as you're doing these evaluations as the Broncos front office, do you see a guy that can eventually get you to 13-3 when Drew, or what now I guess 14-3? If you see that in Drew Lock and you see, man, like we see signs that he can play that way again, like the way he did against the Panthers consistently, and we can be that good, we can challenge the Chiefs, then I would stay with Drew. But if you look at Drew, and this is where it's more about Drew than Justin Fields or Trey Lance or even Mac Jones, I think if you look at Drew and you see a guy that, even if he's playing his best, like think of the Raiders game at the end of the year, Phil. Drew played well, I thought. He made some big time throws, didn't turn the ball over, was generally impressive, and the Broncos lost that game. So if you look at him and you say, even if he plays better, even if he stops turning the ball over and he takes a step forward, if you're still going to be in that 10-7 range or 9-8 range, and you decide that's not good enough, we're not going to get to where we need to be ultimately, then I would go ahead and make the move.
Like for Drew, when I think about him taking that next step, sometimes like that Raiders game, maybe he's playing a little too conservatively because in the back of his mind, he's like, hey, I just don't want to turn the ball over. Like that's his big priority. Whereas when he's just out there playing loose, he really can sling it, make those unscheduled plays, get out of the pocket a little bit and try to move the ball down the field. But I agree, Eric, if you don't ever think he's going to get to that point, then you've got to really seriously think about taking one of these quarterbacks because the idea is that you're not picking this high again, right? But
Right.
if you really take a look at this quarterback board right now, I think it's pretty safe to say Trevor Lawrence and Zach Wilson are going to go 1-2. I
Yeah.
think we can say that. It really starts where the 49ers are, in my mind. If they take Justin Fields, I think that might change some thinking here for the Broncos. Um, that's sort of where the draft begins for me. I mean, do you think that?
Yeah. I just think that if you take, just because it seems like if Mac Jones goes to the 49ers, they're like the one team that's considering him that high. You haven't really heard about another team trading into the top 10 for Mac Jones, unless it's maybe New England at like trading with the Broncos at 9. And so all of a sudden, if you're at 4 and Trey Lance and Justin Fields are both on the board, the possibility that one of those guys, first of all, at that point, you're guaranteed one of those guys makes it to 5. And the likelihood that one of them drops all the way to 9 gets exponentially better. And you even think, hey, maybe say Justin Fields goes 4 to the Falcons, and all of a sudden it's the 7th pick and the Lions are on the clock. 2 spots is not prohibitive at that point. I think it will still cost a lot, probably an additional first round pick for Denver to go up to 4, and get that guy. But hey, maybe if they decide one of these quarterbacks is their guy and San Francisco takes Mac Jones, that happens. I think where you get away from Denver probably having a quarterback is if San Francisco takes Justin Fields or Trey Lance, because then in all likelihood, a team is going to call Atlanta and say, hey, we have to get to 4 so we can get this last guy. And I just don't know, based on George Paton talking today about, acquiring more darts so that you can find more players, looking at his history in Minnesota. Obviously, he wasn't the one making the picks, but was a big part of that process. I think if Fields or Lance goes 3 to San Francisco, a team's going to go to 4 to trade with Atlanta. And I just don't think it will be Denver. So you're right. Everything hinges right there with Mac Jones. But Phil, the thing with Drew is that if you look at that Raiders game and you say 60% of his passes, 340 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, 103 rating, and you still lose, and there wasn't like that game changing. Like, those are the types of games where you need a quarterback to take over, and he cannot let you lose, has to, finish off one of those drives. That to me is where if you're George Paton and you watch that game, I know the Broncos secondary was beat up, the defense was dismantled, but if you watch that and you say, man, that's a game we should have won, and maybe a little bit just something, that little extra oomph at the quarterback position would have gotten us over the edge, that might convince me as much as watching the other Raiders game where Drew threw 4 picks.
Yeah. Oh, I guess what I was trying to say earlier was that Drew was just maybe trying to do what their coaches were asking him to do for that game. And if you look at that game, he makes that play to Jerry Jeudy and Jeudy takes off and scores a touchdown. You probably should have held on and won the game at that point. But they gave up a score the other way and, of course, end up losing that game. But, I think that Drew is just got to find that balance of, let me be Drew Lock and let me make these aggressive plays down the field while also being safe with the ball and playing smart. And, hopefully another year in Shermer's system, you think that he'll take a step. Hopefully getting a guy like Cortland Sutton back, he'll be able to take a step. Those are the reasons why I think you could be really optimistic. When you look at the draft, though, Eric, that 49ers spot, does it make sense that the 49ers give up all this capital, make a huge trade up to 3 for a quarterback that in Mac Jones, nobody was really thinking would go that high? I mean, that's where I have my hesitation. I know a lot of mock drafts still have Mac Jones to the 49ers, but like in my head, I'm like, the 49ers didn't need to go up that high to get Mac Jones. And the player who has a higher ceiling than Mac Jones, I think most evaluators would say that Justin Fields makes more sense to me.
Right. I mean, I think it makes plenty of sense to go to 3 because, as we've talked about, if you get your guy and Mac Jones is the guy, and it doesn't matter that you went to 3. And, there is always the chance that, say you were like, oh, let's go to 6 with Miami, for example, or where, I guess Miami was 3 and they went, I guess the Eagles were at 6. So say you went to 6 and then the day of the draft, New England jumps up to 5 and takes Mac Jones at 5, and you think, wow, we thought, like, we did our due diligence. We thought we were going to be able to get him at 6. I mean, you just never know how these things are going to fall. And I thought George Paton's comment about, a lot of these things happen on draft day because you want to see how the board unfolds. Well, the Niners knew one way or another, if we go to 3, we can get Mac Jones, we can get Justin Fields, or we can get Trey Lance, guaranteed. And, we don't know who they are going to actually take. Like you mentioned, Mac Jones has kind of sounded like the favorite, but Fields and Lance have both been mentioned there. But they know they're going to get one of those guys. And so maybe it's worth an extra 3rd-round pick to not have the uncertainty there. So to me, that's fine. And I know everybody has ranked these guys, and obviously it's Lawrence, it's Wilson, then it's either Lance or Fields, and then it's Jones for almost everybody. But just because, Mac Jones is the 5th quarterback on someone else's board, he could be the 2nd on the 49ers board. And Trey Lance could be the 5th quarterback on somebody's board, and he could be the 3rd on somebody's board. So we've talked about that because you've mentioned, like, you don't love the idea of taking the 5th quarterback, for example. But taking the 5th quarterback, if he's actually the 3rd quarterback on your board or the 2nd quarterback, isn't that big a deal. And I did see a stat, Phil. If you look at the last 10 NFL drafts, there's only really a couple of 1st overall picks or the 1st quarterback taken that you can argue were slam dunks, no doubt, the best quarterback in that draft. It was Cam Newton in 2011, and I'm trying to remember the other guy. But essentially, this
is the point, podcasting right here from you.
Yeah, Cam Newton was one, but I think what it shows is that Trevor Lawrence could end up being outplayed in the league by Zach Wilson. You could take, Justin Herbert has outplayed Joe Burrow and Tua so far. Who knows if that continues to happen? But there's all this. You got to go out and do it. And if you believe in one of those guys, go get him. There's nothing to say that taking Trey Lance or Justin Fields or Mac Jones earlier or later, like, eventually you got to go on the field, and that's when you prove it.
Yeah. I just think that, like George Paton said on Thursday, you got to do some projecting here. Nothing's for sure. You got to guess and project out here. Just in my mind, I think it makes a lot of sense for the 49ers to take Justin Fields. Then you've got Mac Jones and Trey Lance here. Trey Lance seems like maybe he's going to be not quite NFL ready at the moment. So you're going to need another quarterback to start the season out, and then maybe you go to Trey Lance later. That's what it feels like to me there. And then Mac Jones, it seems like maybe a pocket type of quarterback where he's really accurate, but you're not going to ask him to get outside the pocket. You're not going to ask him to make these unscheduled throws. He's not going to take off and run down the field. He doesn't quite have that athleticism in my mind. So I don't know. When I just look at the board and I try to play things out of my mind, if the 49ers take Justin Fields, then to me, it really seems like the Broncos won't try to take one of these other quarterbacks. It seems like they're going to stick with Drew Lock. But that's just my opinion. Maybe Trey Lance is a project, and maybe they're like, hey, we can keep Drew and Trey Lance and just see. That's possible, but just in my mind, I just don't see that happening if Fields goes to the 49ers.
Yeah, see, I think if Lance is still there at 9, I would take him, and I think the Broncos would, because I just think the value of potential is there. I just am not sure. I think if Fields goes 3, the likelihood that Lance goes 4 to the Falcons or somebody trades up to 6, for example, I think that rises pretty quickly just because somebody's going to want the last of those big 4 quarterbacks, excluding Mac Jones. And so I think the odds that Lance slips to 9 is just not very high. Now, if Jones goes 3rd, then obviously you've got 2 guys left, Fields and Lance, that could both fall to 9. And I think there's a decent chance of that. But for me, it's less about would you take Lance. If Lance is on the board and you come on at 9, I wouldn't hesitate. I would take him just because of the potential there, his ability, the arm strength. We heard this week, Daniel Jeremiah and Dan Orlovsky both said for the Broncos, if either Trey Lance or Justin Fields is on the board at 9, go get those guys. They wouldn't do the same for Mac Jones necessarily. To circle back, Phil, Kyler Murray was the other guy that was the top quarterback taken. That's kind of the unquestioned. But I mean, you look at some of these other ones. Joe Burrow was the first quarterback taken. Herbert played better than him last year. You look, Baker Mayfield has been outplayed by Josh Allen. Mitchell Trubisky obviously been outplayed by Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson. Jared Goff, that one's maybe arguable between, or I guess you would say Dak Prescott has easily outplayed him. Jameis Winston, first overall.
The Mayfield and Josh Allen, they've each had one really good year. So, like, I mean, last year Josh Allen outplayed him, but that's not been true for their entire career so far. So,
I mean, but Baker's never been mentioned as an MVP candidate the way that Josh Allen was.
Yeah, that was the one year that Josh Allen was really good.
Blake Bortles was the first quarterback taken in 2014. EJ Manuel in 2013. Andrew Luck, a really good prospect, but obviously his injuries. Russell Wilson has had a much better career than him, so it's uncertain.
Slam dunks. Yeah.
Well, I mean, at this point last year, you would have said Joe Burrow is number one, and maybe Tua should be number one. No one was saying, with the exception of your guy Chris Simsville, no one was saying like Justin Herbert should be in this conversation, but he went out there and showed it on the field. And it's been 1 year. We'll have to see what happens. But there's this, like Drew Lock is probably he's obviously had a better career than Dwayne Haskins. I think you could argue that Daniel Jones and Drew Lock are somewhat similar. Daniel Jones probably had a little bit more success, but like the order, I think, can be somewhat misleading.
That and like the situation that the quarterback falls into has so much to do with the success that they have early in their career. And, I think that you could argue that Drew Lock's not had the easiest go of things here, just with the changes. I mean, Daniel Jones, another guy who's had to go through those changes. So, you just never know what's going to happen in the future, and I know a lot of people said, hey, Josh Allen didn't have that success like we saw until his third year. So there's something to be said for giving guys some time and letting them develop a little bit more. But
it's rare. On
the flip side, there's a couple of quarterbacks in this class that have really high ceilings, and you can't let those slip by. Like if you don't draft Trey Lance and he goes past you and turns into this superstar, you're always going to look back and be like, why didn't they take Trey Lance? So
yeah, I mean, you could, but also like you could take Trey Lance, and then if Mac Jones is incredible, you're going to be like, well, why did that's just how it is. Like that's part of the draft. But yeah, if I'm the Broncos, if I'm George Paton, I'm saying a little prayer that the 49ers take Mac Jones, because it just increases your options. It opens things much, much wider that either Lance or Fields is going to be there at 9, and even gives you a better, maybe they decide it's worth trading up to 4 for one of those two guys if they're available, or worth trading up to 6 if one of those guys is still there. I mean, it just puts a lot more options in play, I think. And who knows? Maybe they love Mac Jones and we just don't know it. I mean, we're just talking about the two guys that George Paton was asked about today, who are, again, widely considered the 3rd and 4th best quarterback. But Phil, I don't know. Sometimes I get this sense ahead of the draft, like what's going to happen. It's not always right, obviously, but I feel like they're going quarterback. That's what I feel. Yeah.
Really? You looked into your crystal ball, huh?
I feel like they're going quarterback.
I disagree. I don't think so. I think they're going to try and get a player at a different position who can come in and help contribute here pretty early. And I think they're going to stick with Drew. But we'll find out in a week, huh?
So if Trey Lance is on the board at 9, you would not draft him?
I would not.
Wow.
I would not. I think there's just a little bit too much unknown there, considering, like, I think he's only throwing the ball more than 24 times in 2 games only. And he's essentially played 1 season of college football at North Dakota State. So when you're talking about projecting for Trey Lance is a little different than projecting for Justin Fields. I mean, there's just different levels here where you're just like, this guy has all the athletic tools. This guy could turn out to be a big-time stud. This guy could be another Josh Allen. I know that's a guy that people like to compare him to, but even then, I'm not even sure if that's a great comparison. But I just think he's too scary considering some of the other talent that might be on the board right there where okay, this guy's going to be able to come in and upgrade us right now. And because Drew Lock is still a question mark, there's just too much there that makes me nervous in my mind.
So then you would pass on Zach Wilson too.
No, I would take Zach Wilson.
Well, but it's a similar situation where he had one really good year and that's it.
Yeah, but what you see on tape from him, he's throwing the ball a lot more than Trey Lance is throwing the football. You know what I mean?
Got it. So even though there's one season,
hold on a second. Okay. He's also he's beaten Boise State twice. He's gone on the road and beaten Tennessee. He's beaten Boise State was ranked both of those times. It's a little different than the competition that North Dakota State is facing. That's what I'm saying. Zach Wilson has played some tough competition and has thrown the ball down the field in those games. Trey Lance, we've just not really seen that from him.
I mean, I get the argument about the competition, but Trey Lance is also playing with worse offensive talent.
Yeah.
You look at a guy
who's loaded, but yes.
Well, but comparatively, I mean, you look at Mac Jones and you say he had one really good year because the year before he quite frankly didn't play good enough for them to go to the playoff. He played really well the next year as they've got 3 first-round picks at skill positions and they've got a ridiculous offensive line and they've got Najee Harris. I mean, you can make the same argument, but yes,
Mac Jones is harder to project too.
The throws are a little concerning, but it's not necessarily. I don't know. I think part of that is game plan, which I know you're not saying that it's not, but I think you just have to. That's why they get paid the big bucks, I guess, to figure these things out. But I think that's just a trend, Phil, now in today's kind of transfer style. I know that's not the case with Lance, but
Lance could have transferred before this last season. He could have transferred and gone and played somewhere that was actually having a season. He decided not to do that. So
you'd be knocking on him for that if he did that.
No, if he was hey, this, I'm not sure if we're going to have a season here. Let me try and go somewhere where I know I can get on the field. He could have done that.
I think that there are a lot now. You see these QBs with one good season, and you've got to decide what's real, what's not. Joe Burrow had one really good season. He played well the year before at LSU, but he had one really good season. Mac Jones had one really good season. Zach Wilson had one really good season. But 2019, Phil, Zach Wilson completed just over 60% of his passes, 11 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, almost 20 sacks. I mean, it wasn't like he took a big leap. And so with him, you're taking a big leap of faith to say he's not going to regress back to what he was previously. And that, again, there's no way to know. That's part of the fun of this, of dissecting it. But I just think Trey Lance's potential is intriguing. And so my last thing on this is that if Drew, my hope, Phil, because best case scenario, people want to know, what do you want to happen? What, blah, blah, blah. The best case scenario is for Drew to take a massive step, be a top 10 guy. Broncos don't have to use draft capital. They've got a rookie quarterback or a rookie deal quarterback who's really good and get to add, maybe get to trade back and add a couple guys. So I'm sure the Broncos want to stick with Drew because it makes life easier. You don't have to spend draft capital. But all that said, if the Broncos don't get better play at that position and not just a little bit better, but markedly better, you're stuck in this middle ground where you've got all of this offensive talent on rookie deals. You've got an experienced defense that could be really, really good, and you're just wasting it. And so that to me is, and I get how that could apply to your argument of, well, then don't take Trey Lance because he's a project. But to me, I just think you've got to think, if we've got a team that has Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, Noah Fant, KJ Hamler, Melvin Gordon, let's go for it. Let's get in this mix. And then maybe, say you can't afford some of those guys after Trey Lance's 3rd or 4th year or whatever, or 2nd year. Well, at that point, you hope he takes the step where he can do it. But it's just like George Paton said, if you don't have a really good quarterback, you're not going to sustain success in this league.
Yeah, I agree, Eric. You got to have good quarterback play. Some of these other guys scare me a little bit, but Justin Fields to me would be really, if he was somehow available when the Broncos were picking, then I would be like, oh gosh, you got to really think hard about it.
At 9,
he's just not going to be there though.
I would be shocked.
He's just not going to be there. So, yeah. I mean, there's so many options. There's so much intriguing angles to this thing. Sitting at 9 makes things really interesting just because so much could happen ahead of you. I think that first hour and a half or so on Thursday night is going to be really must see TV.
Yeah.
Eric, I know we got an email about a quarterback situation with the Broncos, but it doesn't involve the draft.
No, it doesn't. Our listener, Bob, he wants to know what is the situation with the backup quarterbacks. Bob G wrote in and said he loves the show, the positive perspective, and he wants the team to use the 9th pick on a different position. But he says, is Brett Rippon a backup you can trust? Jeff Driscoll, is there untapped potential there? Um, I would expect the Broncos to add some sort of veteran backup at some point to compete with Drew Lock if he is the guy and they go in a different direction in the draft. Obviously, there's been rumors here and there about different trade options and veterans on the street still. I think if the NFL approaches a similar like practice squad thing, or you want to keep 3 QBs, Brett Rippon could be a guy that you keep. I think he's shown some intriguing potential as a backup quarterback. A lot of people kind of relate him as the Kubiak to Locke's John Elway, that they're like really close, and Locke has talked about how much he means to his development. I would think at some point they would move on from Jeff Driscoll, just based on what I saw last year. Rippon wouldn't have continued to dress if you weren't going to be the guy, or if Driscoll was going to be the guy long term. I think that ship has probably sailed. It didn't work out. I think he's probably still on the team to give Denver options if you want to go into camp with a 4th guy, or you can't quite add the veteran you want to, and you have to go into the season with one of those guys. But I think of those two, Rippon's probably got the better chance to make the team.
Yeah. And I would be surprised really if either of those guys made the team just at this point, just considering how much talk Peyton has, how much time he's spent talking about bringing in a competition at the quarterback position. To me, that means they need somebody who's behind Drew Lock, who, if Drew doesn't play well and you're midway through the season and it doesn't appear like he's taken that step, at least you have somebody behind him that you could turn the reins to and still salvage the rest of the year. So,
yeah, I only think Rippon as a 3rd QB. To be clear there.
Yeah. And so maybe that means you make a trade. I know some people like the idea of Gardner Minshew coming in. Maybe it's somebody like that. I would have thought maybe Alex Smith could have been an option, but of course he announced his retirement. So, but I definitely do think that if they don't draft one of these top end quarterbacks to come in and compete for the starting job, at the very minimum, they need to bring in somebody to come in and push Drew a little bit here. Rippon is not pushing Drew, He's just a nice. He's just like a nice option there, and the two of them are friends. So,
right.
That's what I would say about that. So, Eric, let's talk a little bit here about the offensive line. There's 2 guys here in Penei Sewell and Rashawn Slater who appear to be top end talent at the tackle position. Maybe they could play a little guard if necessary, but primarily tackle options here at this point that could be available to the Broncos at 9. But of course, the Broncos already have 2 starting caliber tackles right now. Do you think there's a possibility they could add one of these guys to really bolster the top 5 guys as a whole here?
Yeah, I think that there is a possibility. I wouldn't trade up for one of these guys. I think if you trade up, it's got to only be for a quarterback. But if you're there at 9 and quarterbacks are off the board, and either Sewell or Slater sitting there, I think you really should consider it, just because, like you said, both can definitely play tackle. And Jawan James, George Paton said he's been in the building. He looks great. They expect him to be the starting right tackle. But, he played 3 games and just over 60 snaps in 2019. He obviously didn't play last year as an opt-out, which don't want to hold that against him. But he's had some injury issues in his career. And so you wonder, is he a long-term answer there? Can he play 16 games? Garrett Bowles has talked in the past about how Juwan needs to gain the trust back of the team. So those are things to consider. And I think if you can have I know you, Phil, as a Pac-12 guy, love Sewell's potential. But if you can just have a guy there for 10 years on the right side, maybe you move him to left at some point when Garrett Bowles moves on. That's really intriguing. And then with a Slater, he can play a tackle, but he can also move inside to guard, which gives you some intriguing potential there. I do think the Broncos have somewhat of an embarrassment of riches along the inside because Netani Muti is a good player too, and you want to find a way for him to get on the field. And you've already got Dalton Reisner and Lloyd Cushenberry and Graham Glasgow, who was a priority free agent. So um, it's not the biggest need, but I think listening to George talk on Thursday, he said, we're not going to draft for need. We're going to draft the best player available. And then he kind of said the best player available within reason. To me, that means if Kyle Pitts or Jamar Chase is there, they're not going to take them just because that's too many guys. You almost can't fit all those guys on the field. But I think a tackle definitely fits. And then if it's not one of those two guys, Phil, maybe if you trade back into the low teens, Christian Darrisaw is an option. Maybe you use your first round pick on a different position, and then early, with number 40, you go offensive line. It sounded like from listening to George Paton, I would be somewhat surprised if one of their first 3 picks was not an offensive lineman.
Yeah, he definitely said that they wanted to add some depth here. So I do think that makes some sense here, and just the fact that they need a swing type of guy in case something happens to him, in case something happens to Juwan James. They need a guy who could play either one of those positions as a backup, or if they need to, have him possibly be able to play a little bit of guard or something like that. They just need some depth there. Elijah Wilkinson has moved on. He was sort of that guy who could play anywhere along the line. They need somebody who could do that.
In this league, you can't expect your offensive line to be as one unit for 16 games. It's too physical. It just doesn't happen. So you need somebody, and whether it's with a top 10 pick, whether it's trading back, whether it's in the early second round, it doesn't really matter. I think, again, based on what we heard from George Paton, I would expect sometime probably in the first day 1 or 2, I would think they would take an offensive lineman of some sort.
Need some sort of depth. Just not sure if that makes sense at 9, or maybe it does, and you reshuffle your line and figure out a way to get the best starting 5 out there, so just that the unit plays really well. Really a mystery to be seen here what the Broncos could do with that number 9 pick, but they need some depth here on O-line. We've talked about quarterback and offensive line. I feel like there's one other guy out there who thinks the Broncos should go defense, and his name is Steve Atwater. Let me get to my conversation with the Hoff, Mr. Atwater. Steve, thank you so much for taking some time to hop on the neutral zone here. It's been a minute here. How you been doing?
Yeah, I'm doing good, Phil. Thanks for having me on again. Hadn't seen you in a while, except for on Zoom. And, I'm used to seeing you in person, man. We got to get back to that.
Yeah, I miss you. You've been keeping good, good health? Everything's going well?
Yeah, everybody's doing well, man. I got that second COVID shot today. So a couple of weeks, man, I'll be fully vaccinated.
Oh, man, I'm
happy about that.
Happy to hear that. Congratulations, Steve.
Yes, sir. Appreciate it. You too, man. I know you got yours. Got the
Yep,
next
I
one
got my
coming
second
up.
one coming up. Yeah, so we'll get back to normal before you know it.
That's right.
Steve, I saw on social media you got a special package this week, huh?
Yeah, a little gold jacket, no big deal.
You
But, hey,
when that comes in the mail all the time, huh?
Yeah, and when the guy delivered it, man, I just looked at the box. I just headed over by the front door for a while, just like, man, it's in there. Gotta open it up eventually.
Yeah.
So I finally opened it up, man. Yeah, it was amazing, and that box just makes it, even more special. That box is one of the coolest boxes I've ever seen.
Yeah, that looked pretty cool. I mean, did it still fit? Everything was good to go?
Yeah, it fit pretty good. So yeah, I'm not going to make any adjustments to it. So I've already sent it back to the Hall of Fame, and they'll have it ready for us when we get out there.
And so then you won't see it again until the gold jacket ceremony a couple of days before the induction ceremony.
Yep, exactly.
How are you feeling here? We're a couple of months away from all being in Canton now, and does it feel a little bit more real? I know you've had to wait an extra year here.
Yeah, no, it does. It does feel a little real. Feels like it's going to happen. And I wrote my speech last year, and I'm going to start back up. Just going over it and kind of tweaking it to make sure that it's just right for when we get there in Canton in August.
What do you think it's going to be like, Steve? I mean, you've had a long time to think about it now.
Almost too much time. And I think we'll probably have less time than we were going to have at first. So, I'll have to probably, make it even more concise than it is. But, you know, it's just a small part of it. So, yeah, it's going to be great. It's going to be great.
You're going to cut out some of the thank yous, huh?
Probably not. I'm gonna try to keep the thank yous in there. I was thinking about trying to have some type of message in there. I just don't know if I can get the message in there and all the thank yous. So, I think I'm gonna go with the thank yous, but that may change. I don't know.
Yeah, a lot of pressure. Do you think it's cooler now that you're going to be going in with some other Broncos that same weekend?
Oh man, absolutely. It's gonna make it, that much better. But the only thing about that is on party nights, we'll be split up at different parties.
That's
But on the night of my party, though, both John and Peyton, they'll be free to attend mine, whoever else's party. But on their night, they're both going the same day. So I'm sure I'll be moseying back and forth between both of those.
So you already got that planned. You got all your stuff taken care of. You're all good to go.
No. It's not all planned, but that's kind of laid out. We'll have access to visit the other Hall of Famers parties and that. And I imagine I'll be spending the most time in those two tents there. So, but yeah, a lot of it is planned out. It's all kind of set. My wife and I, we've been making a lot of the plans for the party, and Lisa Williams, she's been amazing in helping out, and of course, I got a guy Hayden and Michelle with the Hall of Fame. We've been all kind of working together as a team to kind of get everything squared away, and where we'll have a little bit of sanity once we get down there.
And how is it going to work? Do you know, Steve? Are they going to do you guys on Saturday and then the next year's class on Sunday, or how do they plan on organizing things?
Yeah, that's the plan. On Saturday, the 2020 class will be inducted, and on Sunday, the 2021. I'm sorry, is that right? Yeah, the
Yeah,
2021 class will get inducted on
Sunday.
on Sunday. The actual speeches and all that. But for me, the coolest thing is the gold jacket ceremony. Anyway, when you officially get welcomed into the group by all of the current Hall of Famers, and I think we're going to all do that together, I believe, on Friday.
That is a special moment, Steve. I've got to be at that ceremony a couple times now. I
Yeah,
get goosebumps, just thinking about it.
I know. Same here, man. That's kind of like I said, the creme de la creme. That's the moment, man, where they all say, "Man, you're in with us now. You're one of us now."
Yeah.
Yes,
Football immortality, Steve.
yes, yeah. I hope they don't do any hazing.
No.
You're in
You're too
now.
old for that.
Yeah, run through this wall.
Well, it's going to be a very special weekend. I can't wait to celebrate you. It's long overdue. I'm really looking forward to it, Steve.
No, same here, Phil. We're gonna have an amazing time. We just got to be patient, and hey, it'll be here before we know it.
Steve, the draft is going to be here before we know it, just about a week away now. So, I know that we're going to be doing some live programming here on all the Broncos social media channels. You've been doing your research here, Steve. What do you think? What should the Broncos do at number 9?
You know what? I think that although I like both of our inside linebackers, Alexander Johnson and Josie Jewell, I think we need to add another a top-notch linebacker there, and I'd like to see us really take Micah Parsons. I know he had some off the field stuff, but I mean, it was a little bit when he was a little younger, and some of it was a little bit disturbing. But hopefully, he's got all that nonsense out of his system. He seems like a mature guy, but he's a heck of a football player, and I think he stepped right in and helped our football team this year. So that's the guy that I like. And if it's not him, then maybe Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, JOK from Notre Dame. Although I think he's, his build is more like a safety. I've seen him more in space covering receivers and tight ends more so than I have seen him take on offensive linemen. And if a team decides they're going to try and pound the ball on you, I don't know if he'd be able to hold up. Just taking those guys on head on with the size. But he's a heck of a football player. I wouldn't be upset if we took him there either, knowing that I think he's more of a safety, but regardless, he'll see some time on the field. Even though I know Justin and Kareem are going to be starting, JOK will be on the field playing somewhere.
Yeah, it's hard when you're like that in between positions. Sometimes it's hard to find a spot in the NFL. But if you're talented enough, you can make it.
Oh yeah. If you're one of the top 11 guys, man, it's hard for the coaches to keep you on the sideline. Every time somebody makes a bad play, they throw the playbook down, and look over, and you're looking at them like, yeah, I got to get this guy in the game.
So let me get this straight. You want 2 defensive players, huh? That's what you like. Big surprise there.
No. I'm just saying one of those guys. One of those guys. Or I'm saying they're at 9. Or if we trade back, then we can get several other guys. I still would like to see those positions addressed at some point. There's a guy. He may be a second or third rounder. Nick Bolton out of Missouri, another inside linebacker, a little bit more compact. I think he's going to have a heck of a career at the next level as well. I like him as another inside linebacker. Obviously, some other safeties, some corners too. Now, obviously, if they decide to go quarterback, though, that means it's going to be some serious competition for Drew Lock, which isn't a bad thing. I kind of want to see that and see Drew Lock. Hey, man, beat him out. And whoever it is, whoever we bring in, I want to see Drew Lock take that next step and beat him out.
We know that Drew Lock's been here working out. He's focused. Everything that we hear he's working out with Peyton Manning. Doing some film stuff. You think that he's capable of taking that next step next year? It feels like this team can be pretty good if he's able to do that.
Oh man, this team could be amazing if Drew Lock is hitting on all cylinders, being an elite quarterback. And it was very encouraging that he's working with Peyton Manning. How many guys even have the opportunity to do that? So he's extremely fortunate in that regard. And I think he can make a big jump. He has the raw tools. He has the arm. I think he has the right mindset. He's just got to be able to put it all together. Really understand all the nuances of this offense. And sometimes it takes some guys a little bit longer, but I definitely think he can do it. It's up to him though. He's got to put the time in, and got to make the throws, accurate throws, and know where his offensive linemen are, knowing when he can step up into the pocket, when he can take off and run. When it's best to do that. But yeah, I certainly think he can do it. I told him, I saw him the other day at the facility. I told him, hey man, I'm pulling for you.
Yeah. Well, Steve, what is it like for a player when a young guy who's got that pressure on his shoulders, he's heading into his 3rd year. He knows that this is going to be a make it or break it type of year. What's that like from a player's perspective?
Well, man, I think it's a lot of pressure, one, but at the same time, if you are able to make it to the NFL, and if you're going to be a great player, you got to be able to block out everything and focus on getting better, focus on, studying the film and understanding what's happening, and being able to, when you step on the field with opponents, to be able to see, hey man, this is exactly what I saw. And this is, I've done this in practice 1,000 times. I'm going to do this exact same thing I did in practice, and I'm going to score touchdowns. The players that can't do that, who can't think clearly in the moment, their careers unfortunately aren't long. They don't have long careers. So especially with all the distractions now, when we played, we didn't have all the distractions, the cell phones, texting, people on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, and just 1,000 different ways people can contact you. We had a cell phone, or maybe a pager. I know a young guy like, what is that? Right. And we put that in our lockers and turn it off, and people couldn't contact us, so we got a chance to get honed in on what we were doing, and the players that can do that now, I'll tell you, those are the guys that that are going to have a chance of having great careers. If you can't block out the noise, man, it's going to be tough.
And from his perspective, I mean, he had the injury his rookie year, only played 5 games, had the COVID off season, had some injury last year. It's really like he's only been in the league almost like 1 year, with playing experience. So
absolutely, that's another thing that over this offseason, he's got to get in like tip-top shape, the best shape he's ever been in his life. Because if you can't be on the field, after a while, the coaches, they don't want to hear any excuses. They say, hey, either you're here or you're not. I understand, hey, yeah, the offensive lineman didn't block, you got your clock clean and you're hurt. But coaches, they don't like that. They don't like guys who get injured all the time. You got to be able to, take a hit and bounce back and, hey, maybe ice after practice or ice after the game, but you got to be ready to go the following week. And so, he's got to, build up that durability a little bit more too, to where he's able to be on the field for 16 games out of the regular season and, all the postseason games as well.
Steve, I don't know. I know you're out in the community. You talk to people. It's hard for me to get a sense of what fans want. Some fans say, we got to get another quarterback. Other fans are like, no, give Drew Lock a chance. I mean, it really does seem like Broncos country is divided on this.
No, I agree. I've heard the same thing. I've heard, a ton of people saying, hey, let's not give up on them. Let's stick with them. Let's continue to develop them. Other guys, hey, he can't do it. But I don't have that mindset. I think any young player can develop, even if he would have had a terrible season last year. You can make a quick turnaround with the right coaching, putting the right time in, getting mentored by someone like Peyton Manning. But it's still up to the player to, again, get focused and honed in on what's important. And I know all the coaches, they'll put in as much time as he's willing to put in. They'll be on Zoom calls with him. They'll sit down and meet with him. They'll go up to the chalkboard, write it all out. But he's got to put in the time to know this offense inside and out.
Yeah. Well, all about pressure being a first-round pick, so you know what it's like.
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, like I said, the focus was there. We didn't have as many distractions back when I played. I had, great leaders. Dennis Smith was, he was my mentor right there. Charlie Waters was my defensive backs coach who had played in the league. And, I knew who he was as a player. And, so anything they said, I was like, hey, this is the law. So I just, I listened and I didn't question him. I wasn't like, oh, why do you do that? I just did it. Whatever they say do, run over here. The hole is going to be here to hit it. All right, cool. That's what I'm doing.
So you're saying the situation has a lot to do with it, huh? If you're in the right spot.
Yeah.
Well, Steve, I could tell based off your background, you're ready for football. You're ready to get back to it, huh?
Oh man, I can't wait. I can't wait. And I'm anxious to see George Paton at work in his first draft as the Broncos GM. I just want to see Coach Fangio, Coach Donatel, Coach Sherman, all those guys happy that, we got some good draft picks and hopefully we can be back in camp fully this year as opposed to the, what it was like last year. That was the worst training camp ever, just in terms of, not the fans not being able to be there. This is a sport that brings people together and, it's about the crowds and the rowdiness in the stands. And, we just didn't have that last year and I hope we can get back to that this year.
I hope so too, Steve. The fans bring a lot of energy and
man. I didn't get a chance to see you that much either, man.
I know, that's right. You were up on your perch. You got your big stage, man. You're like a big star. You can't be seen with somebody like me,
Come on, man. You got the big chair up there anytime you want.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you, Steve. Hey, Steve, thank you for spending some time with us here on the Neutral Zone, and look forward to being on air with you on Thursday night.
Oh, same here, Phil. Appreciate you, man. Keep up the great work, my friend.
My thanks to Steve Atwater for taking some time to chat. It had been a while since we got to catch up here. He hadn't been on the podcast for a while. Fans were clamoring to know what the Hoff had to say here. So really lucky to be able to get him here, Eric. let's wrap up the show here with our shout outs the way that we normally like to do. You got any shout outs, Eric?
Yeah, Phil, a big one this week. VP of Strategic Initiatives, Brittany Bolin, and Dr. Michelle Barron from UC Health helped organize a vaccination event down here at UC Health Training Center. It was open to players, coaches, staff members, alumni, and then all their families, which I thought was a nice touch. And more than 150 people were able to get vaccinated earlier this week. Just a step in the right direction, and hopefully, Phil, a step toward playing football this fall in front of a full crowd at Empower Field.
Yeah, hopefully society's starting to get back to some sense of normalcy here, and the vaccination and all the people who are administering those all throughout the world. A big thank you to them, and obviously the work that the Broncos and UC Health have been doing here has been tremendous. Eric, I'm a little surprised you went straight to that and not Liz Manis.
Oh, how could we forget? In-person community events again. It's a big time for Liz Manis.
Yeah, that's going to be a big thing. No more Zooms, Eric. A little bit more complicated. Got to go out into the community and interact with people.
That's right. Yeah,
I have a feeling, though, Liz is eager to be able to do that.
I think so.
All right, well, to wrap up this show, we talked quarterbacks. We talked about trading up maybe to have to get one. We talked offensive line, and then we got our thoughts from Steve Atwater, who we are all so excited to be able to celebrate coming up in August here with a long overdue induction ceremony for number 27. So also shout out to Steve Atwater. So we'll be back next week with a special edition of the Neutral Zone on Wednesday, Eric. Yeah.
Excited, Phil. Time to give some draft predictions, draft best case scenarios. You're kind of negative, so maybe a worst case scenario from you.
No, I'm going to come up with a dream scenario.
Yeah, that's right.
If everything plays out right, this could be a beautiful draft, I think, here. And, regardless of what we think, the Broncos are going to get better next weekend. So that's one way to look at this thing. So, but make sure you check out the Neutral Zone one day early next week on Wednesday. That's going to do it for us. For Eric Dalala, I am Phil Milani. You've been listening to
The Neutral Zone.